Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. It's a real pleasure of mine tonight to introduce you to Dennis Mitchell. He is the CEO of Starlight Capital, which is an interesting company we're going to find a little bit about. But more importantly, he's been part of a coalition that has been launched, has launched the Black Opportunity Fund, and he wants to discuss, and he's been out there in the community discussing and really making an advocacy of initiatives to combat systematic racism, which obviously is a huge issue that came to light. I probably long overdue coming to light, frankly, but came over to light really in the summer of last year with all of the protests coming out of Minneapolis, St. Paul. Mr. Mitchell, Dennis Mitchell, welcome to our show.
Thanks, Brian, and please call me Dennis.
Dennis, tell us, why did you get so involved in this initiative to combat systematic racism?
I think everyone's life goes through stages, right? When you're young, you get the privilege and luxury of being completely self-absorbed. But one of the key transition points in anyone's life is when they have children. And so when you have children, you start to take a keen interest in the future and what it may hold for them. And, systemic racism and its impact has been with me for my entire career and my entire life. And I've been able to deal with it and cope with it. But when I started thinking about my children and what they might face, I realized that it was time in my life to really take a stand, and not just for them, but you start looking around at your friends and your colleagues, and some of them have the same opportunities you have and some of them don't. You start to take a keen interest in what it means for their children as well. So I just felt like this was the right time. And importantly, I felt like the world was paying attention, and that if we actually rose up and did something, that there would be follow through and that we'd actually have backup if we tried to take that hill.
Tell me a little bit about yourself. Your Starlight Capital is a major real estate company?
Well, our parent company, Starlight Investments, is one of the largest real estate asset management firms in Canada. They're the largest residential landlord in Canada with over 60,000 apartments. They have a significant presence in the US with over 10,000 apartments. And then they have 8 million square feet of commercial real estate in Canada. And we were launched in 2018. And so we manage both private investments in the real estate and infrastructure space and public investments. So we've grown to over 400 million. And I'm very honored and pleased to be, the CEO and the CIO of that platform, and looking forward to shepherding us to greater growth going forward.
So you've accomplished quite a bit in your own career. Tell me a little bit about your background. Where'd you grow up?
Yeah, so I grew up in Hyde Park before it was cool to grow up in Hyde Park. And I grew up knowing with 100% certainty that I was going to play professional football for a living. And then 6 knee surgeries later, I figured I'd better find something else. And I can honestly tell you, like a lot of kids these days, I wandered in the wilderness for a few years, not really knowing what my purpose was going to be. And I was fortunate enough to stumble across Warren Buffett. And, I went to Chapters on the way home from work, and I picked up a book called Buffettology, and I read it cover to cover, and I discovered my new purpose in life. And from that point on, I decided that I was going to manage money, and that I was going to do so in the mold and image of Warren Buffett. And I was going to try and create as much wealth and as much positive karma as he has throughout his career. So that led me to Century Investments and eventually to Starlight Capital, where I'm fortunate to be able to build this business with 10 to 12 people that I worked with for a decade at Century. In fact, my business partner, Graham Llewellyn, he and I worked together for 10 years at Century, but we've known each other since elementary school. So I'm a little older, so I've known him for almost his entire life. And
what's the Black Opportunity Fund?
Sure. So that's an initiative that over 50 Black professionals in Toronto came together to create in the summer of 2020. And the idea was, again, when these types of initiatives are started, people always talk about, well, how are you going to eliminate racism? I want to state equivocally that racism is an idea that lives in the mind of the ignorant and the uninformed. Okay. And so our goal at Black Opportunity Fund is not to eliminate racism. It's to eliminate the impact of racism on the lives of all Canadians and hopefully everyone everywhere. And what I mean by that is simple. What racism does is it robs those who are so deserving of the opportunity to maximize their skills and talent and drive. And so what we are trying to do is we are trying to create opportunities in the Black community to create businesses, to create organizations that uplift our community. And so our initiatives are threefold. We want to be able to grant money to Black-led organizations so that they can continue their great work. We want to be able to support Black entrepreneurs as they strive to create businesses and create intergenerational wealth. And then we want to invest in existing Black businesses so that they have the leg up they need to continue to scale up and grow and create the examples that we so desperately need in the Black community. And I want to make one point clear, Brian. Doing this has benefits for all of society, not just Black people, not just Canadians. And I want to make a point to you. Imagine that Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos and Steve Jobs were all steered away from careers in technology because they were straight white men. The impact that that would have had on society would not have been contained to just straight white men. All of us would have a lower standard of living had that taken place. Now turn it around. In this society, globally, 15% of the global population are white men. Just forget about whether they're straight or not, but 15% of the global population is white men. Now, imagine the innovation and imagine the standard of living we could achieve if we could empower the other 85% of the global population. What wonders exist that haven't been invented or created because those people haven't been invited in, empowered, and given opportunity? So the Black Opportunity Fund is not solely about what can we do for Black people. It's what can we do for society? Because the innovations and the things that will come out of the Black Opportunity Fund will benefit everyone everywhere. And so that's why it's important to empower Indigenous people, women, LGBTQ2SA, why it's important to empower Black people, because the benefits accrue to everyone in society and it will lift us all up.
Dennis Mitchell, well said. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back more with Mr. Mitchell in just a minute. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I'm chatting tonight with Dennis Mitchell. He is the CEO and CIO of Starlight Capital, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But he's also someone that's very involved in the Black Opportunity Fund and advocating against systematic racism in our community. He's got really quite an impressive portfolio background. He was Senior Vice President and Senior Portfolio Manager for Sprott. He was Executive Vice President and Chief Investment Officer for Century Select Capital Corp. He was an associate, GLP associate with the RBC Financial Group. He was a financial advisor with Scotiabank. He's a chartered business valuator with the Canadian Institute of Chartered Business Valuators. He's got a designation from the CFA Institute. He's got an MBA from Schulich, and he's got an HBA from Wilfrid Laurier University. He's a Toronto Foundation board member, and he's a member of the Steering Committee and Governance and Planning Committee for the Black Opportunity Fund. So quite an impressive resume, yes, sir. But tell us, what about football? So you were wanting to be a football player.
Yeah, I have two older brothers, one who's passed away, but my older brother who's still with us, he and I both had football as our number one passion and our love. Unfortunately, the Mitchell boys were not designed to play football. So he's up to 11 knee surgeries. I stopped at 6, but that was my passion. And that's important because in life, if you've got passion and purpose, it provides a focus for decision-making. And what I find is that a lot of people make poor decisions because they just don't have a discipline or a framework for deciding, okay, what are the parameters I should consider when I make this decision? And so when football was taken away from me, as I said, I wandered in the wilderness a little bit and I didn't really have that focus. You know, when football was my aim, I knew that I was going to be working out and eating this and I was going to be doing that and not hanging out here and not drinking that. When you don't have that focus and purpose that, you know, guides your decision-making, you can stray. And so finding Warren Buffett and finding sort of the investment management career really did provide me with purpose and focus. And it's been sort of a guiding principle in my life going forward as to what I want to build, not just for myself and my family, but then, you know, when I cease to walk this earth after 80 some odd years, what am I going to leave behind for them and for everyone else? So football is fantastic, but if we're honest, I'm 46. I'd be done playing football by now anyways.
Unless you were Tom Brady. What position did you play and where did you play?
I played running back and I was fortunate to play for the Humberside Huskies and the Wilfrid Laurier Golden Hawks.
Fantastic. Well, I played a little bit of football myself. I was captain of my high school football team. We won the Georgian Bay Championships at one point in time. I was a corner linebacker and a second string running back. And on the second day of tryouts for the University of Western Ontario Mustangs, I got knocked unconscious. And the coach at that point in time said, maybe, son, you should think about academics rather than your football career. I was a little bit small, particularly when I was faced off against people that were double my size. And so it was a little bit challenging, but it was a lot of fun. And football taught me a lot. Did football teach you a lot?
Absolutely. Discipline and teamwork. And those sound like cliche lines, but anyone who's ever tried to get in shape or anyone who's ever tried to get ahead in their career understands that motivation wears off after time. It's the discipline to stick with it day in and day out, especially on the days you don't want to be doing this. That's what separates you from everybody else and what gets you to your goal. And then teamwork is so important. When we talk about business is actually a series of optimization decisions. Okay, what product should I launch? Which markets should I compete in? What price should I set? How should all of those things come together so that we can make optimal decisions and maximize returns? Well, if you have diversity of thought process, diversity of lived experience, diversity of cognition, then you're likely to make more optimal decisions because you'll consider more factors and you'll have more experience collectively to draw upon to make those better decisions. So playing football, and it's the ultimate team sport, right? I mean, it's the only sport where Rodrigo Blankenship at 5'9", 140 pounds can also face off with, Jordan Davis, who's 6'7", 390 pounds, and they play the same sport. Football is the only sport where that happens. But you have such specialization, but you also have such collectivism. It teaches you the value of having people around you pulling in the same direction and relying on the person next to you to, maintain their gap control. You maintain your gap control. Your quarterback stays clean. That's just one example of the need for teamwork and pulling together to accomplish a greater goal. And that's what you do in business all day long. So I was very, very fortunate to play competitive football, baseball, basketball growing up.
You've had a lot of opportunities and you've been successful. What do you think the secret of that was? Because as I've interviewed so many people, particularly coming out of those protests of 18 months ago, this radio show is coming to you from Peel, from Mississauga and Brampton. There's a lot of people within the Peel educational system that think that systematic racism streams too many Black Canadians into general activities, discourages them from wanting to achieve, that they don't get the mentors, the inspiration, the help, etc. Something went right in your life. What do you think went right for you that we've got to make sure we provide to other people?
Well, myself in particular, I was fortunate enough to have two brothers who were a lot older than me. My brothers are 12 and 15 years older than me. And I was fortunate to be the son of Lindell Mitchell. And she's probably the most powerful individual who ever walked the face of this planet. So she was a tremendous advocate, and she made it clear to me that settling for a mediocre life when I had such talent and such potential was absolutely unacceptable, and it wouldn't happen on her watch. And I was fortunate to have brothers who were so much older than me because they had already been through it. They had developed strategies and they understood what I was going to be facing. And so they were great. They were surrogate fathers who, gave me the tools and the knowledge to deal with the things that I was going to face in my career and personally. So, a lot of what I've achieved is on the backs of their experience and their sacrifice and their hard work. But I do want to circle back to one thing that you said, Brian, about opportunities. Everyone has opportunities in their life. It's what you do with them. And there's no such thing as good opportunities or bad opportunities. That comes from what you do with them. And I'll give you an extreme example. You might admire your next door neighbor's big house and their car and their fantastic life, and that might motivate you to pick up a gun and go next door and shoot them, right? That's jealousy and rage and coveting. You may admire your neighbor's your lifestyle, their car, their house, and all of that stuff. You might go over and ask them some questions about how they achieved it and what they did, and that will allow you to follow their footprints in the snow and achieve similar success, right? There's an old saying that, smart people learn from their mistakes, great people learn from the mistakes of others. The whole history of humankind is laid out for us on the internet, and that is a tremendous opportunity to learn from the collective experience of everyone who's ever come before you. And so there's no such thing as good or bad opportunities. It's just what you do with them. That's what defines you, and that's what allows you to make an impact. Now, I will say that systemic racism does deny people opportunity, and that's why we created the Black Opportunity Fund, to replace those opportunities for Black people in particular that have been denied to them by things like streaming. On the Peel District School Board, it was discovered, and this hits home for me because my children are biracial, but there was an open house at an elementary school, and this girl, her parents were given two different flyers for the evening. Her Black parent received a flyer that denoted all the basic and general courses that she could take in high school, and her white parent received the advanced streaming. And so you could see right there, in stark contrast, the treatment of whites in the Peel District School Board and Blacks in the Peel District School Board. And it had nothing to do with her transcript and her grades or anything. It was purely the color of her skin. We're going to stream her this way. And so that denies her the opportunity, and not just her, but it denies society as a whole and the rest of us the benefits of her skills, talents, and drive. And we're poorer for that. So BOF, by replacing those opportunities that have been denied to a lot of Black people, we are creating a lasting benefit that accrues to everyone in Canada. And if we can replicate this globally, everyone everywhere.
So there's been a bit of a controversy, if not, frankly, a lot of controversy, questioning, does systematic racism exist? What do you think?
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because you'll always have a whole bunch of people who will say it doesn't exist in Canada, it doesn't exist anywhere. I think it's really interesting that I think the population in the United States is 31% white men, yet they control 65% of political office, right? If you look at the number of CEOs around the world, you got a lot of Black CEOs in Africa, you have a lot of white CEOs in the United States, you have very few female CEOs anywhere on the planet. I challenge anyone to explain to me why this is the case without making an argument for racism. Okay. And it can be subtle. Racism is a spectrum. And a lot of people at one end of the spectrum, expect to see cross burning and white hoods. And at the other end of the spectrum, it's kind of just like that person who clutches their purse a little tightly when a Black person gets on the elevator, or, doesn't want their kids playing with Black kids at the schoolyard, just subtle stuff, right? The screening of resumes based on how the name sounds, so racism is a spectrum. And on one end, people will just say, oh, bias or preference or just happenstance or I didn't know. And at the other end of the spectrum, you have virulent racists who want to expel Black people from the US or what have you. But it's a spectrum. But it is the reason and the result of a system, primarily in the United States is probably the best example, where you founded a country on the back of slavery. And so the idea that you would create institutions that would last hundreds of years that have their roots in slavery, and the idea that that wouldn't echo through time and have impacts and ripple effects hundreds of years later is kind of ridiculous, right? I mean, you can see it in the course of rivers, you can see it in the raising of mountains. Things that happen and start off really small hundreds of years ago have an impact later. And you can see it in overt actions like redistricting, right? And redlining, where you're actually packing Black people into one neighborhood and ghettoizing them. And people like Strom Thurgood and Bull Connor. So the idea that, racism doesn't exist in the United States or in other countries, well, just tell me how and when it was eliminated. Was it eliminated through the passage of a statute? Did we indoctrinate everybody in school and that's what eliminated it? You can always find people to say like it doesn't exist. But I think it's interesting that somebody who one individual person can never testify to the sum total of lived experience of everyone. Somebody who's not Jewish can't sit here and say, there's no such thing as anti-Semitism. I've never experienced it. I've never seen it. So therefore it can't exist. A male can never sit here and say there's no such thing as sexism. I've never seen it. I've never experienced it. There was an interesting opening for a conference I went to where a gentleman said, all the men in the room stand up. And we all stood up and he said, I want you guys to tell me what you guys did today to avoid being sexually assaulted. And, most of us laughed, and you kind of, you're a little uncomfortable, but no one put their hand up and no one volunteered anything. And he had us all sit down and he said, I want all the women to stand up. And there were significantly fewer women than men at this conference. And he asked them, what did you do today to avoid being sexually assaulted? And this avalanche of things came out, from, carrying your keys in your hand and parking near the elevator or parking in a light to not going here by themselves, this and that. And it was just a shocking number of things and things I'd never considered. And I'm a father of a couple of girls. So, again, when people say it doesn't exist, what they're really saying is that they've never seen it or they don't care. But the idea that racism and sexism doesn't exist is not spelled out by the demographics and the echoing of who controls wealth, power, and decision-making in this country, in the United States, and generally around the world.
I heard from a lot of people that, last year when the death of George Floyd occurred the murder of George Floyd occurred in Minneapolis, St. Paul, that racism in the United States was very different than racism in Canada. And people were saying, well, some people were saying there wasn't racism in Canada, but then other people came on my show and said that racism most certainly exists, but it's hidden, and maybe even when it's hidden, it's even worse. What do you think about that?
I think if you look at the history of the United States and the history of Canada, you get an understanding for why the racism isn't as overt in Canada. The formation of the United States was basically a collection of people in independent colonies who said, no more, we're not taking it. And they rose up and they fought a bloody war, and that's how they ended up forming their country. Canada is one of those Commonwealth countries where we kind of outlasted the Queen. She woke up one day and said, do we still own that thing above the United States? Just give it to those guys. We got other problems to deal with at home. So, the formation of the countries is very, very different, and it leads to a very, very different. I don't think anyone would argue that people in the United States in general tend to skew more to the right than do people in Canada. We tend to skew slightly to the left. So when you start looking at sort of the makeup and culturally what we're like, you can see how in the United States, things would be more in your face, more overt, more bold, more direct, versus in Canada, where things would be a little more subtle, a little more reserved, right? And so that's what I think leads people to think that, well, Canada is very different from the United States, and so by extension, there must not be any racism in Canada versus the United States. That's what racism looks like. We don't have that here, so we don't have racism. But that belies the subtlety of the racism that exists in Canada. And when you dig through the demographics, when you dig through the numbers, what you find is that we have very, very similar patterns in terms of wealth creation, decision-making, and who holds power in this country compared to the United States. It's interesting that you have similar demographics and similar results, but people would claim there's tons of racism in the US and none in Canada. It just doesn't work out. The math doesn't add up.
How has racism impacted you personally?
I've been fired for being Black.
You've been fired for being Black?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Look, when I started off, I said, racism is an idea that lives in the mind of the ignorant and the uninformed. And let's remember, ignorant really means the absence of knowledge or information. It's not a synonym for stupid. So racism exists in the mind of the ignorant and the uninformed. And so when you're thinking about decision making for people who are ignorant and uninformed, it's not based on logic. So it's not like you can sit here and say, I'm a valuable employee, I'm creating tons of wealth, I'm a key employee to building this business. There's no way someone would fire me just because I'm Black. But remember, the person making the decision is already ignorant and uninformed. And so their decision making is already biased and subverted. And so they're not making a rational decision based on, if I fire this person, my business is going to suffer. What they're thinking is, I need to get rid of this person, and we'll be just fine without them because they're not really doing anything. I mean, how smart are they, right? Because they're Black. And so, yes, I've been fired because I was Black. And, when I was younger, I didn't realize the advocacy I had and the environment wasn't right. And so the murder of George Floyd came at a time where people were actually listening to the lived experience of Black people. And I think that's one of the differences from why the murder of George Floyd galvanized so much of a movement, not just in the United States, but globally, versus other horrible crimes that have been committed in the past against Black people. The time is right. And people who are not Black are paying attention and getting involved. That is the big difference. Because, I mean, if you walk up to the average Black person and say, does racism exist? Have you been impacted by it? Has it, detrimentally impacted your life? They'll probably roll their eyes and tell you yes. And they can rhyme off personal experiences that have impacted them. But what's different this time is the rest of the world is paying attention and appears to be interested in making changes. And that's great. That's what we need.
I was very positively impressed with how many white people were out in those protests, particularly in Canada, frankly, but across the world, along with Black people in protests after George Floyd. Did that impress you?
Again, to my point, the fact that the rest of the world and people who weren't Black were paying attention, I think that is what has really, really changed. I mean, in the 60s, when you had the civil rights movement, sure, you had Malcolm X, you had Martin Luther King, but you also had Lyndon Johnson, right? You had a ton of white people who stood up and said, you know what, this isn't right. And it's not just about Black people. It is about the impact on everyone. And I think that's important. So when you see white, brown, yellow, I mean, every shade of the rainbow marching in lockstep to say, this can't continue, this can't happen again, that's the change, that's the unity and the teamwork, if you will, that you need to combat big challenges and big problems. And racism is a big challenge and it's a big problem. And I think this time around, we have a better approach. You know, in terms of the Black community is ready to stand up and say, we will take ownership and responsibility for our own plight, but you need to help us because you've created this system that has put us in this position. We're ready to move forward. We need you to come to the table as well and help us.
We're chatting tonight with Dennis Mitchell. He is the CEO of Starlight Capital. He's an advocate against systematic racism. He's an advocate for the Black Opportunity Fund. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back more with Dennis in just a minute. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We're chatting today with Dennis Mitchell. He is the CEO and CIO of Starlight Capital. It's a real estate investment company here in Canada. He wanted to be a pro football player, but had a whole bunch of knee operations and lost that opportunity. Found Warren Buffett and Buffettology. Is that what you called it? Buffettology?
Yeah, that's the book that I bought. It's actually behind me on the bookshelf.
And decided he wanted to become an investor, and has got to the top of that game. But now what he's done, Dennis, you said your passion is this topic. Tell me, why is systematic racism or Black opportunities your passion today?
Again, it comes down to I've got children, and it sounds very cliched and tired, but when you have children, you start thinking about what kind of world they're going to grow up in and what that means for them. And you want to make sure that they're protected and they're safe. And, when you're a Black parent, you've probably heard this before, but you end up having the talk with your children. And I've had it in recent years with my children. My son is a 6'1", 17-year-old Black man. So for a lot of people in this world, he is a threat. He is dangerous. He's not a 6'1", sweet 17-year-old kid. He's a 6'5", dangerous, threatening Black individual. So it's really having children and really thinking about what kind of a world that they're going to grow up in, and what opportunities will be presented to them, and what will they have to do if they are terminated and fired because they're Black. So this has become, I live by a number of mantras, and one of them is keep your interests narrow and pursue them deeply. And I know everyone wants to be a Renaissance person who can do everything and all things with equal skill and talent. But me, myself, when I've studied successful people, what I found is that they've really, really focused on one thing and gotten really, really good at it. And it's allowed them to enjoy and experience a lot of other things. I don't think Bill Gates could dunk a basketball, but he can code like no one's business, right? And it's worked out pretty well for him. So for me, managing money has created tons of opportunities. And I would like to make sure that Black people have similar opportunities that have been denied to them historically through systemic racism. And so this has become my passion. Football has been left long in the past. Money management, I love it. It's my passion. I'm fortunate that I get to work with a hand-selected team of people that I've worked with for decades and who I enjoy seeing every day when we're not in the midst of a pandemic. But in this next phase of my life, as I enter into that phase of give it all away, you spend the first third of your life learning as much as you can, the second third of your life making as much as you can, and the third phase of your life giving it away and preparing the next generation. As I enter into that phase, I'm really, really focused on my community, and I'm focused on my children, and I want to make sure that when I'm gone, I've left a positive impact and I've lifted up that group of people and that community and my kids, such that they can accomplish more than I could have when I first started walking this earth.
So let's accept the fact that there's systematic racism, but you accomplished great things even in that environment, and you did it because of your mother, because of your brothers, because of your own passion and desire. What's the example? What's the lesson there?
The lesson, excuse me, the lesson there is, again, opportunity. Everyone just wants an opportunity. And, If I look at my career, the first opportunity that I was given was this small little $8 million real estate fund. And I was told, if you didn't grow this fund, we were going to take it away and turn it into something else. Now, that wasn't the greatest opportunity ever, right? But I took that opportunity and I studied and I worked hard and I grew that fund into a $1.5 billion fund. It was larger than all the other real estate mutual funds combined and doubled. And so again, it's not whether it's a great opportunity or a terrible opportunity. It's just I was given the opportunity. And through the preparation from my mom and my brothers, I knew what to do with that opportunity. And I took the sum total of my experience and my drive and my will, and I poured it into that opportunity. And the result is what I have now. And so again, the Black Opportunity Fund strives to make sure that everyone just gets the opportunity. And I think you'll see tremendous greatness created because people given that opportunity will run with it. I don't particularly think there's anything special or particularly fantastic about myself, other than I was fortunate to have the brothers I have, the mother I had, and the opportunities that I was given along the way. And I just want to make sure others in my community have those opportunities.
In the last year and a half.
One thing I do want to say, Brian, is I think a lot of people look at me and they say, look, he's been successful and so is Ray Williams and so is Colin Lynch, so there can't be systemic racism. That's like saying to a returning war veteran, well, war can't be all that terrible. 99% of soldiers come back. So can't be that deadly, right? I mean, no one would ever say that. Not in this modern day and age where you can go home and watch war on TV. We know how horrible it is. Well, looking at me and saying, well, your example proves that there's no systemic racism is false, and it denies the path that I took to get to where I am. It's almost like saying, I know you were fired because you're Black, but that's not really racism. You know, you overcame that, so here you are. So the system works and we don't have any problems. I don't think Jews or women or people of color or Indigenous people or queer people would agree with that assessment.
No, I agree with you, but I think there's also some lessons in your lived experience. I think unquestionably the role that your mother played, the role that your brothers played. Mentors are critically important in life, and I think making sure that people realize the role they play as mentors. You've got Muhammad Ali behind you on your wall. Inspirational people in life are critically important that can get you going. I've had numerous people on my show that I've interviewed, particularly focused on Toronto and the educational system, and they've talked about how it's been specific teachers or principals or guidance counselors or parents or something that made the difference. And sometimes people don't realize that they can make this huge difference, but they can. And frankly, the lack of it or the opposite of it, a guidance counselor that encourages you not to pursue your dreams can be unbelievably detrimental. So I do think there are lessons learned in your and some of the other gentlemen that you named, lived experiences.
Absolutely. And I was fortunate, and just giving you a little more color on my brothers. My oldest brother was a self-made entrepreneur, multimillionaire. My brother who's still with me is a principal in the education system. And that was an interesting story because he dealt with a lot of racism in the school system when he was growing up. And that's TDSB. I think it was TSSAA back then. And so their experiences on their different paths, they were kind enough to share with their little brother who was so much younger than them. And my mother, as an immigrant coming to this country as a nurse and having to clean people's homes until they recognize her nursing credentials, she taught me humility and perseverance. These are invaluable lessons. And you're absolutely right, Brian. Sometimes people don't realize the impact they can have on others' lives. And I'll go you one better. It's important to recognize that life isn't personal. As much as I was fired for being Black, anybody with my color of skin in that role would have been fired for the same reason. So you have to recognize that it's not personal. And so talking with other people and understanding that their path and their journey wasn't a straight line and it wasn't just from, bottom left to top right, understanding that they suffered setbacks, right? I mean, Muhammad Ali was banned for fighting for a few years during his prime. He won a gold medal for his country and he came back and he couldn't eat at a lunch counter with whites and he ended up throwing that medal in the river. Although I'm not sure if that story is true anymore. I'll have to dig deeper into that. But my point is that you can't take setbacks personally. And I think I was able to do that because my brothers and my mother shared with me their story. And so I understood that adversity was coming and that the best way to deal with it is just to suck it up and power through it. And, in this day and age, I think we're also acknowledging, mental health. And so when I say suck it up and power through it, I don't mean don't acknowledge it. I mean, understand that it's not necessarily personal and that the world works in sometimes horrible ways, but recognizing that you've got to find a way to get through that and past it, and being able to lean on the experience of other people, and understand that here are some of the tools and methods they use to deal with this and to get through it, were invaluable. And again, coming back to the Black Opportunity Fund, that is what we want to do. So it's not just about money. It's not just we want to give money to organizations and give money to entrepreneurs. We also want to provide them with what we call wraparound services, mentorship, guidance, access to legal services, accounting services, access to strategic mentoring and consulting. All of this together creates an ecosystem that allows Black entrepreneurs to thrive based on the opportunities that they have for their businesses and personally. There was RBC put out a report a couple of days ago that talked about the wealth gap on racial lines in this country. And they pointed out that Blacks in particular had the lowest rate of house ownership in this country. And when you start looking at the legacy of redlining in the United States, and you start wondering, was that implied, was that utilized here? Is there a systemic racism aspect to why Blacks have got such a low rate of home ownership? You start to wonder. You can see it in the US because, again, it's more overt and in your face and bold. You start to wonder about the subtleties of how banking was enacted and how it was rolled out in this country, and does that not have an impact? But regardless, the Black Opportunity Fund it doesn't have a time machine. We can't go back in time and fix things, but what we can do is create those opportunities now that have historically been denied to people in our community, and that's what we intend to do.
What do you think about other potential solutions like Black-centric education?
I don't think that anything that limits your interaction with other people is a great idea. You're never going to get me to be a supporter of segregation. But I do think that organizations that create a safe space for Black people to be their authentic selves, right? I mean, that's another sort of tired cliche, if you will, being your authentic self. But I don't think, and don't take this personally, Brian, but I don't think that straight white men in this world understand that there are so many different worlds that other people live in right next to them, right? I mean, you will have a hard time understanding the lived experience of a woman of color in this world because you don't have the same experiences, you aren't treated the same way, the expectation set for you is completely different for her. And so I think anything that encourages more interaction between people of different backgrounds, races, religions, or what have you, creates more tolerance, more understanding, and as a society and as a people, brings us forward. But as long as those are safe spaces, I can't tell you how many times I've said to myself in a meeting where someone who's been overtly condescending, that I have to remember not to be the angry Black man because that'll undermine everything that I say and everything that I've tried to do. I don't necessarily think you have that same experience, Brian. You're free to express your emotions however you'd like. If you would like to, if you would not like to, if you'd like to express anger, sorrow, joy, you're free and unconstrained to do so. I have to be cognizant that there are such stereotypes out there about Black men that I can't fall prey to them. Even if I'm absolutely furious and justifiably so, I just can't.
Tell us a little bit more about the Black Opportunity Fund. If people are interested in it, how do they get involved? How do they apply?
Absolutely. So we're fortunate to have Craig Wellington as our executive director and Ray Williams as our chair. And anyone can go to the website, blackopportunityfund.org. If you want to donate, there's a donate button. If you want to get involved, and this is important, this organization is inclusive. We have 18 or 19 people on the board. We have men, women, Black people, white people. We have Francophones, Anglophones. We have people who were born in Canada, people who came here as immigrants. The board is very inclusive, and the committees of the board are very inclusive. And it's because we recognize that the Black community is not monolithic, and the Black community is not by itself in this struggle. And so if you want to get involved, whether you're Black, white, male, female, whether you're Canadian or American or what have you, go to the website, blackopportunityfund.org. You can donate, you can ask questions, you can get involved in various committees, initiatives. We have a number of town halls. Next month is Black History Month, which, is plus and minus, good and bad, but it'd be nice if we studied Black history and human history every month of the year. But next month is Black History Month. We have a number of events planned, and there are tons of opportunities for people to get involved, to become more knowledgeable and contribute to the advancement.
And if people have got business opportunities that you fund. How do they apply for those business opportunities?
Absolutely. We're actually on the cusp of launching a very, very comprehensive support program for entrepreneurs and for existing, well, entrepreneurs and soon to be entrepreneurs. And so again, going to the website will provide you with all of the information and all the connections. Craig Wellington, there must be 5 or 6 of them because he does so much work and he's so involved, but he's been a phenomenal resource and probably the best hire we've made at the Black Opportunity Fund. And our chairperson, Ray Williams, he's kind of the godfather of Black people on Bay Street. And we're so fortunate to have his leadership on the board, both starting this organization and bringing everybody and all the necessary individuals and skill sets to the table. So I'm fortunate to be one of the co-founders along with 50 other Black professionals, and really excited about what we're doing and what we will accomplish. So anyone who wants to get involved or learn more, blackopportunityfund.org.
Dennis Mitchell, CEO of Starlight Capital, is telling us about the blackopportunityfund.org, about systematic racism, and about his own personal life story and lived experience with racism in Canada. We're going to take a break and come back with some concluding comments in just a minute. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We're chatting tonight with Dennis Mitchell. He is the CEO and CIO of Starlight Capital. It's a real estate investment fund here in Toronto, in Canada. And he's also a founder of the Black Opportunity Fund. The website is blackopportunityfund.ca, not .org, as we said earlier. So .ca, if any of you out there are interested in getting this information. Dennis, all of us parents have conversations with our kids at different times. And you said that you had to have the conversation with your son. I presume that you'd have one with your daughter as well. Tell me, what did you talk about?
Yeah. And so in the Black community, we always call it the talk. And really it's how you are going to blend into society and how you are going to deal with how you are perceived. And so the talk for my kids is, it really started when I started teaching them how to drive. And once you start teaching them how to drive, that's sort of a milestone of independence, where they're going to be out there and you're not going to be there to tell them how to react and tell them what to do. And so quite bluntly, it's a conversation that you explain to them how you deal with white authority figures, because that is in a lot of Black people's lives, the most dangerous interaction that they will have. And so I'm fortunate to have a number of police officers who are Black and white in my sphere. And we had that conversation with my children. Keep your, for instance, I'm sure you keep your license you keep your license in your wallet, you keep your registration and insurance in your glove compartment in your car, right, Brian?
Yep.
I keep my registration and my insurance on the visor of my car. And the reason I do that is so that if my son is pulled over, he doesn't have to reach into the glove compartment with his hands out of sight in an awkward position that might scare a police officer. So we keep them on the visor of our car. I always tell them when they get in and drive to keep their wallet where their license is, right on the dash or right in the gear shift box component, so that when they're reaching, it's in plain sight and there isn't an excuse or a reason for them to be shot. It's conversations like this where you transfer knowledge and information as to how to navigate in a world that is dominated by people who will see you and perceive you as a threat, and making sure they understand the consequences of losing their cool. It's not about, it's not about best case scenarios. It's always about worst case scenarios and avoiding them, such that you get home alive, such that, today is garbage day in Oakville. And so when I take the recycling out to the curb, I always make sure that I have my license and my identification with me. And you probably, Brian, don't think twice about taking the garbage to the curb and whether or not you have identification on you. But I'm a Black man in a predominantly white upper middle class neighborhood. And the last thing I need is for someone calling saying that there's someone suspicious in the neighborhood and having the police arrest me and I don't have any identification or ability to prove that this is my house. It's that conversation that you have with your children so that they are constantly prepared for situations that other people don't even think about and take for granted. I have to make sure that my children are prepared for those scenarios. And here's the key. In every scary movie, there's that point where the guy and the girl are walking down the alley, and I don't know why they always take the shortcut through the alley, and the guy steps out at the front, and they stop and they want to turn around, and another guy steps out behind them. And all of a sudden they know something's going on. At some point when you're walking down that alley, you pass the point of no return. And now you've got to deal with this scenario, these two people. If you've prepared for it, you're not surprised, you have a plan of action, you can do something. If you're not prepared for it, then things escalate and they get worse. And I'll give you an example, Brian. I used to drive a very nice Mercedes-Benz. And on my way home one day, someone tried to carjack me. They followed me, they pulled up in front of me, and they got out and they tried to carjack me. And I was ready for it. Because when you're a black man driving a nice car, you're prepared for bad things to happen to you while you're in that car. And so I actually ended up driving over my neighbor's lawn, and I already knew the path to get to the nearest police station, and I survived that encounter, right? Because I was prepared for it. And so the talk is about preparing your children for the world that they are going to navigate in and making sure that they are prepared for worst case scenarios. That's what the talk is about, and that's what I had with my children.
Dennis, I think lots of us are parents, and lots of us don't have to face what you face or what your kids face. But I think we can identify with your concern for your kids, and the depth of your concern really comes through in your description of the talk. And so really appreciate you sharing that with us. And it brings home, I think, more than almost anything else, systematic racism and how you and your kids have to prepare themselves. And it's completely inappropriate that you have to do that, but it's probably reality right now, regrettably. And so thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate it. Remind us the website for the Black Opportunity Fund.
It's blackopportunityfund.ca. In my defense, the original website was .org, and I, for some reason, defaulted to that. But it is blackopportunityfund.ca. And thank you for correcting that, Brian.
And Dennis, thank you so much for joining us and being so open and sharing with us your challenges and your successes. And it sounds like you're on your way to even bigger successes. And so thank you for that very much.
Thanks, Brian. I hope so. And maybe we'll come back and we'll do this again once I've got a few more accomplishments under my belt.
I look forward to it. That's our show for tonight, everybody. I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online at www.saga960am.ca. All my podcasts and videocasts are available on briancrombie.com, on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, and on Apple, Audible, and Speakeasy podcasts. Good night, everybody.